Well, welcome to Christ and Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short. Glad to have you along for the journey today. You know, we're into the Christmas season, and there's so much to talk about in the Christmas season. This is the one time of the year where I think most people are open to discussions about theology. They're open to discussions about the Bible, the Christmas story. There's so much knowledge of the Christian Christmas story, even among people who don't even believe it. I know that a lot of Jewish people here in the United States and in the Western nations, they know all about the Christmas story. They don't believe it officially, but there's an interest and a curiosity about the details of the Christmas story. And so I think everybody, whether they believe it or not, they're familiar with some of the basics of the Christmas story. And there is a fascination around Christmas time. There's no question about it. Now, this year is a very different year because we've gone through this pandemic. We've gone through the coronavirus crisis. And it really does take a little bit away from the celebration of Christmas when you're having to worry about things like whether you're going to get the vaccine or not, whether the vaccine is safe or not, or whether you're going to get the virus, or whether you're going to pick it up from someone who comes over for the holidays. Now, there's the whole issue of whether we should get together with family and friends and relatives over the Christmas season. Now, there are some government structures, for example, in LA County, they're saying to not get together with someone other than your extended family. I know in London, England, for example, I watched on television the other night, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson was telling people, please do not celebrate Christmas with anyone other than your family unit. In other words, don't have people come over from your extended family. Don't have cousins come over. Don't have aunts and uncles come over. Don't have other people come over because you might get or contract or spread the coronavirus. And so they're taking these drastic measures which will totally throw off the Christmas season and the highlights of the holiday seasons, and basically extend the lockdown to even locking down families from celebrating Christmas and the holidays. And we saw a little bit of this at Thanksgiving, but we're even seeing more of it now during the Christmas season. And the sad thing about it is that if you look at the statistics about who's getting sick and who's dying and who's getting dreadly ill, there are not many people who are getting deadly sick and dying of this who are, say, under 70 or even 75 years old. So the chances of actually contracting the coronavirus and dying from the coronavirus, if you're 75 or under, the chances are probably like 99.9% that you're not going to die of the coronavirus. So if you have those kind of odds, if you're under 75 and there's an almost zero chance that you're going to actually die of this coronavirus, then why wouldn't you get together with loved ones around the holiday season? Now, I can see if you're someone in your 80s and 90s, you probably should be more cautious and you should be more careful about everything that you do until, of course, you get the vaccine. And I did in another video talk in terms of there seems to be nothing wrong with getting the vaccine, definitely nothing wrong with getting the vaccine if you're in your 80s or 90s, because the risk of the long-term side effects of even a bad vaccine are minimal compared to the upside of possibly being immune to this disease. So you definitely should consider getting the vaccine if you're in your 80s and 90s. But if you're in your 70s or below, there really doesn't seem to be any reason why you can't be getting together with your loved ones and extended family if you're careful. Now, we have the situation out there in California, John MacArthur's Grace Community Church. 7,000 people, at least 7,000 people every Sunday gather together and have been gathering together for the last 4-5 months even, in the midst of this pandemic, in the midst of even lockdowns and strict regulations in LA County. And they have been getting together every Sunday without social distancing, without wearing masks. They've been, I'm not sure to the extent they've been shaking hands or hugging and doing things like that, touching one another. I'm not sure about that, but they have been doing church pretty much the same as they had done church before this coronavirus hit. And they haven't had really anyone sick. They haven't had anyone hospitalized. They haven't had anyone spreading this that we know of. There hasn't been this outbreak at the church. There were a couple people, a security guard and someone else, who came down with coronavirus, and yet they recovered rather quickly. So there really hasn't been this health crisis at Grace Community Church, even though we're told that those kind of events are the so-called super spreader events that we have to avoid. I think that test case shows that if you're sick and you have the sniffles and you're sneezing and you have a headache and you're nauseous and you have the symptoms of either the flu or the cold or whatever like that, then yes, you stay home. And I think that's what Grace Community Church has been telling its people from the get-go, that if you're sick, don't come to church and don't spread it. And that should be the same with the common flu, the regular flu, influenza. If you have the flu or shakes or colds or shivers and you're feeling under the weather, definitely stay home. Don't put other people at risk. We don't want to spread any germs. We don't want to spread any disease. And so I think Grace Community Church is telling their people to do that and use their common sense and use wisdom. But as far as locking down the church, as far as actually cutting off all services, like, for example, Andy Stanley in Atlanta basically canceling all in-person services for an entire year, and then well on into 2021 and doing that, that is so drastic, and that is so overreacting to this thing based on health statistics. So in terms of whether Christians should get together for Christmas dinner, get together with the holidays, the relatives and family and friends, I think the same policy that John MacArthur and Grace Community Church use. If you're feeling ill, if you're sick, if you show any of the symptoms of even the flu or any kind of communicable disease like that, the cold, you should stay home. You should not go to the dinner. You should not go to the Christmas gathering. But if you don't have symptoms and you're in a pretty healthy age group, if the chances of you actually dying of this coronavirus are 99.9%, staying healthy, and 0.01% of you actually getting fatally ill from this, then you shouldn't fear meeting with friends, family, relatives for Christmas. So one of the statistics that's not being talked about a lot is the mental health aspects of lockdowns. We're seeing in the United States, we're seeing a spike in the number of people suffering with depression. We're seeing a spike in the number of suicides in certain age categories. We're seeing a lot of the mental health illnesses and the fallout from locking down, and also the fallout of locking down businesses so that people are unemployed. You know, it's really strange. I remember when I studied economics in college at Trinity College, when I went one semester, I went to Trinity College one semester before I transferred to Wheaton College, and I took an economics course. And one of the big fears in society among leaders at all levels of leadership is unemployment. There are just so many negative aspects to unemployment. And this was a big factor. Everybody was really concerned, we have to make sure that unemployment is kept in check. We can't have unemployment spike up, because it's not just the financial fallout that occurs during chronic unemployment. It's the mental and social fallout that occurs with unemployment. For example, when you have young men, prime example, when you have young men in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, and 50s, even getting up into the 50s, middle age, and they're chronically unemployed, all kinds of bad things happen. These men get into trouble. They take up crime. There's more fighting. There's more violence. People need things to do. People need employment. One of the things that employment does, especially in the bigger cities, is it keeps people occupied in something constructive and positive, and that is earning a living and working and using up their energy. But if you take away their employment, you take away their job, you take away their income, not only do they have a lot of time on their hands, they have a lot of energy, they get restless, they find ways, and unfortunately ways of getting into trouble, especially if you're talking about especially younger men in their late teens. This is a real problem, because you're going to have people hanging out in the wrong places at the wrong time. And one of the things that has been totally absent in this whole debate, and you don't hear this, and maybe the politicians don't even want to bring it up, is that these things used to be talked about all the time, about the horrors and the tragedies of unemployment. Well, all of a sudden, the lockdowns have stopped all that talk, and you don't hardly hear anything from the politicians about the negative consequences of lockdowns and unemployment, especially. But then, not only are there the consequences of unemployment as far as people getting into trouble and doing what they shouldn't be doing, and the mental health aspects, you also have the financial stress of unemployment. What do people do when they're under stress and they don't have the money to pay their bills? They don't have the money to pay their utilities. They don't have the money to pay their rent. Whether they're renting an apartment or they have a mortgage on their house, they're not able to keep that house payment up. What about car payments? College loans? You have a lot of situations where there's this financial pressure now coming up, and it's building. Now, some people are able to borrow on their credit cards, and they borrow from banks, and they're able to get a line of credit, and they're having to go into debt. But what happens when that debt comes knocking at their door after these pandemic lockdowns have ended? Well, now they're digging themselves into a hole that they're going to have to dig out. Now, when you shut a business down, for example, that business doesn't automatically just snap back at full capacity. So some of these businesses who have laid off workers, they may never come back. Some of these restaurants, especially the people in the restaurant industry, if they've laid off workers, and these workers are thinking that they're going to come back automatically, and then the boss has to say, hey, we just actually can't hire you back. That's going to be really bad. So the lockdowns have caused a lot of trouble. And one of the problems also is around the holidays, like Thanksgiving and Christmas, people need to get together with their family, loved ones, and friends. They need to do that. That social aspect is vital. And especially people, if they've been locked out of churches, they aren't seeing people on a regular basis in Christian fellowship, and now they're being told, especially just like I said before, I heard on the television, watched Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of England, talking to people in London saying, please don't go over to relatives, family, and friends for Christmas, and don't celebrate Christmas. Only celebrate with your immediate family. Well, if you've already locked down the churches and there's not fellowship there, and you've closed down businesses so they don't have interaction at work, and you're telling people to basically stay indoors and stay inside their home, you are setting people up for a mental health crisis. You are setting people up for a spiritual crisis. And one of the aspects that people don't ever talk about is that we're asking people to go through a crisis on many levels, and these people in a secular society don't have the wherewithal spiritually to deal with it. So, for example, if you were to go back 100 years ago, for example, during the Spanish flu, the people who had to deal with that, many of them were solid Christians who attended solid Christian churches, and faith was a major, major factor in the world at that point. And so the faith level of the population was pretty high, and the knowledge of the Bible was pretty high, so they knew how to stand on the promises of God, and they knew how to pray because they still believed and they still had faith in God Almighty. But today, we're asking essentially secular people, and that's what our world has gone, secular. We're asking secular people to deal with these crises, and they don't have the faith to deal with it. They don't have the trust in God. They don't have even, many people today don't even have like the Sunday school lessons they learned as a youth, or a little Bible school, vacation Bible school lessons that they were, the older generation would have learned. They don't even have that because they weren't taken to church. They weren't taken to Bible classes. And so they don't have the faith base to fall back on. We are going to see the spiritual fallout of this tremendously. We're going to see the spiritual ramifications in years to come. This is going to be a spiritual, like a meteorite, hit the United States and all of these Western nations, because we've locked out people from their churches. We've locked out people from the source of their spiritual nourishment, which is a church, and we've told them basically, get through this, but don't get through it with the church, don't get through it with the Christian faith. And now they're saying, don't even go and be together with your friends and family for the holidays, and don't even have the support and the fellowship and the moral support that you get from just getting together with your blood relatives and your kinfolk and your family unit. We're going to even separate you from your family. Not only have we separated you legally through these lockdowns from your church family, we're going to separate you and put a cleavage between you and your relatives and your families and your relatives and your friends around the holidays. We're not even going to give you that. And so you have to ask yourself, is this the perfect storm for mental illnesses? Is this a perfect storm for a spiritual crisis to happen in this country? And as a pastor and as a spiritual leader, I am saying this is going to look like a perfect spiritual and mental and psychological storm that we're brewing for ourselves. Remember, this is all self-made crisis. This point, the lockdowns are all self-made. The coronavirus did not lock down businesses. People locked down businesses. Governments locked down businesses. The coronavirus did not create a spiritual crisis in the soul of people in the Western world and around the world. Governments created that because they told people they couldn't go to church. The coronavirus did not separate families from one another and friends from one another around the holidays and relatives so that they don't have that support system. Government made it possible for people to be left out there on alone, isolated from everybody except whatever television programming or internet programming was available for people. This is all man-made. And just like what we had at the beginning of the coronavirus debate, when we began to learn the scope of this, we have these health experts and we have the medical community and we have overreacting politicians saying the primary goal is to shut this virus down. And that's what they've been focused on, but they've forgotten that society isn't just about biological life. It involves all kinds of factors, and one of them is economic life. And you can't just put on blinders and say, oh, we're just going to track down this virus and kill this virus, and until we do, we're going to lock everybody down. No, you can't shut down a world's economy just so that you can say we've gotten rid of the virus, because then when you open the society back up, there's nothing to go back to. If you've destroyed the economy and the business community and some of these huge sections of commerce, you're not going to see people just going back to the way it was. You're going to basically bring us back into the Stone Age if you carry on these lockdowns like that. So, and it's the same way with gathering together. Boris Johnson says, don't get together with family for Christmas. Well, why? Why not? Why can't people in the city of London get together with their friends and family over Christmas? Why can't they support each other? If they use wisdom and they use common sense and they use the same kind of rules of engagement that John MacArthur's congregation used out there in Grace Community Church for the last 5 months, while this pandemic has been all over the place, they simply said to people, if you're sick, if you feel the symptoms of sickness, don't come to the gathering. And if you feel okay and you don't have any of the symptoms and you're within an age group that your chances of dying are so slim, next to nothing, then by all means go ahead and meet and don't worry about it, because you can't stop life. You can't put life on pause or halt life out of fear of a virus. Because if you're going to do that, then you close down schools and churches during the flu season, because people die in the thousands and thousands every year from flu. Or people, then you ban going down the highway at 70 miles an hour because people die in the thousands of that. So you got to slow the cars down to 45 or 50 miles an hour. But no, we still allow for highways to exist, and we still allow for people to travel at high rates of speed down the highway to get to wherever they want to go. They just need to follow the basic rules. They need to use their common sense. They need to slow down when the weather is bad, when it's icy, when it's snowing, when the rain, when there's fog. They need to use their brain. They need to use their own rational ability. And so we just go on. Even though thousands and tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people die every year in accidents, we don't shut down the highways. Well, the same way with this coronavirus and gathering for Christmas and New Year's, and we just had month past Thanksgiving. You don't ban people from having these celebrations, because these celebrations are very important to people's lives. It is important. It's very important for families to give each other support, especially in these secular ages. It's very important for younger people to know the grandparents, and it's important for grandparents to see their own children, and it's important for children to see other relatives and to build cohesion. And they just need to be doing it using wisdom and making good decisions. As in anything in life, we need to make wise decisions. But you can't, as a government, stop people from living. And that's essentially what a lot of these draconian, democratic, liberal, mostly, policies are all about. Just stopping people from living because we want to protect you so that you can live. And it's insane. It's gotten to the point where it's ridiculous. So we have to be aware of that, and we have to be willing to say, in many instances, hey, we want to be good citizens as Christians. We want to obey the ruling authorities. We want to live quiet and peaceful lives, but we don't trust our government, because we've seen that they lie to us sometimes. They manipulate us. Politicians use these lockdowns for their own petty, tyrannical ego reasons. We saw, for example, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, admit that she blocked a stimulus package that would give direct payments to people to help them get by and make ends meet. She blocked that solely for the purpose of hurting the president re-election bid. That's crazy. Here's a politician who is saying that people need this stimulus package, but saying she will block it, and she did block it until after the election so that the president wouldn't get credit or any credit at all for helping people out, which might win him some votes and might defeat the opponent. So politicians know we cannot trust politicians to always do what is the right thing. And we need to get all the information we can, and we need to make the right decisions for us and the right decisions for our families, and not just rely on the government like the socialist countries want their citizens to do. We are not people who just blindly follow the government. We follow God. Our number one allegiance is to God. And we have to live according to His laws and His will. And we have to pray, and we have to read our Bibles, and we have to go to church. If the government says we can't go to church, we need to just go ahead and disobey government and go to church. And it's the same way with getting together with our family. If the government says, no, you can't get together for Christmas gathering this year, we have to say, well, wait, hold on. We're going to decide whether we should or whether we shouldn't based on all the factors. And we're not just going to listen to one politician or even a group of politicians telling us what to do. We're not going to concede or cede our lives over to these leaders. That's not the role of government, to tell us and micromanage our existence. We have our brains. God has given us ability, and we're going to use it for the glory of God. So we need to do what God tells us to do and not what man tells us to do. Well, I hope that's been a helpful commentary, and we'll see you back next week on another edition of Christ in Culture. God bless.